The Canto of Ulysses begins when Primo Levi and the other men in the chemical commando are underground in some sort of oil tank. They're scrubbing it by themselves. They're not being supervised, so it's a better job than they usually get. But they can't see the sunlight, or they're in a hole in the ground. Symbolically, it's kind of a grave. A new character comes in, and this character is somewhat of a character sketch also. He's described as a boy, but he's also described as 24 years old, so there's different sort of perspectives here. His position is piccolo, which just, I think, means little, but he's sort of the messenger of the commando. And he says it in French, so it's kind of hard to understand. But what he says is that today's the day that Primo Levi is going to go with him to pick up the soup, like the soup for everybody in the commando. This is actually a good job. It gets Primo Levi out of this hole, and they get to take a nice long walk where they go and get the soup. And they don't have to carry anything when they take the hour-long walk, and they're taking the long way to go and get the soup at the beginning of the chapter. This new character, Jean, he has a position of some authority and he has some influence with the capo, but he turns out that he seems to be a fairly good guy and he cares about others more than himself sometimes. So, the other thing about Jean is that we learn that he speaks French, he speaks German, he speaks English, and during the walk, Primo Levi is trying to teach Jean some Italian. Um, he speaks other Romance languages, so he should be able to hear it and get some of what he is saying. And he decides to do that by reciting some of the Canto of Ulysses. The Canto of Ulysses is the 26th book of Dante's Inferno. Primo Levi at one time must have memorized it. Old Italian poems like this are kind of funny. They're written in three-line stanzas called tercets. In fact, the rhyme scheme's called terza rima. I'll teach you about it one day. But he's forgotten, and what he remembers is very fragmented. And he's sort of desperate to share something with Jean in Italian about, what turns out to be sort of the bigger theme of the book. He's trying to say something about these characters who are in hell, and he's trying to say, don't let go of your humanity. I think in the big picture, that's sort of the theme that he's trying to express. The magic word that you need to know when you're studying this chapter, and you're going to see this a lot over the next 2 years, is called intertextuality. In other words, this chapter, the whole chapter, is an extended allusion to other works of literature. Most prominently, they're an allusion to Dante's Inferno, which is part of Dante's Divine Comedy. These are long, epic poems that tell the story of the journey of a soul from where it is to paradise. And another level, it's the story of Dante going down into hell. He's being led by the poet Virgil, and hell, of course, has 8 circles, and the story has Dante and Virgil descending down into the deepest parts of hell. One of the characters they meet in the very deepest parts of hell is Odysseus, whose other name is Ulysses. It seems that Dante, the Italian, the Latin, has put him in the deepest part of hell because he won that Trojan War by deceit, by trickery. There was nothing honorable about him at all. All those deaths are sort of on his shoulders. He's suffering for it in the deepest parts of hell. Well, the analogy or the metaphor or the parallelism is all too obvious. What we have here is a situation where you have two men, Jean and Primo Levi, and they're together the way Virgil, the poet, and Dante were together as they're descending into hell. They're in hell. Auschwitz is hell. I don't even think it's hyperbolic to say that Auschwitz is hell. And so what we have is Primo Levi using one or two other works of literature to sort of give insight into this. The other work of literature that is, of course, being alluded to is the Iliad, or, yeah, the Iliad. It's that work where we get to know Odysseus and the myth of Odysseus. This is actually a really weird section to put into this book. It's an odd bit of intertextuality. It doesn't really fit into the story well. My only but I do have the suspicion that this is something that Primo Levi had memorized. I mean, it used to be true that part of a good education was memorizing long passages of poetry and other things. Um, but it's probably true. It's probably true that Primo Levi had a fragmented memory, and at one time, as a young man, he had probably memorized this book um, of Italian poetry. Um, Dante is one of the most famous of all the Italian poets, so it wouldn't be surprising at all for somebody in the 1940s to have memorized long passages of Dante. Anyway, it says that he's trying to urge Jean to hold on to his humanity as much as possible. He does say that tomorrow he or I or both of us might be dead, and that's the whole point. I mean, that's the most didactic thing about this book. I think that's what Levi is trying to teach, to this idea that even when you're in hell, you want to do whatever it is that you can do to remain a human being. Because once you're no longer a human being, once you're a Muslim or something like that, then you've lost. And so retaining that sense of humanity seems to be the most important goal of any prisoner in this camp. Especially, that's how Primo Levi thinks that he struggles with, is this line that goes, "Your metal was not made, you were made men." Um, Another translation of that from Dante is that you weren't born to live like brutes, you were born to be men. It's that acknowledgement that we were born with this kind of humanity and it's being taken away from us. We aren't animals that were somehow made into men. We were men who are now being treated like dogs and therefore being made into animals. The chapter ends with a line of poetry that reads, "And over our heads the hollow seas closed up." It's that it's a subtle remember that in the camp, in the lager, they are drowned. There's the saved and the drowned. And there's this idea of being lost and in hell, and that they are hollow men. But that poetic image, that sort of says it all. That's what he's doing here that he doesn't do in a lot of the other chapters is he's really focusing on tone. And the tone of this passage, of this chapter, is, well, it says it over and over again, that they are suffering, that they are in hell, and that they are drowned.